Because of the economic fallout from the pandemic, a surge in food insecurity is hardly surprising. But a new report from the Boston Indicators Project at the Boston Foundation confirms earlier findings that problems with food insecurity go back even further and with consequences for response in the future. To tell us about the report is the project's research manager, Trevor Mattos. Thank you very much for being with us, Trevor.
Thank you so much, Chris. Good to be here.
Trevor, I want to start with maybe the least surprising, but certainly very troubling part of this report, and that is how much worse have things gotten compared with last year?
Yeah, so the situation is dire. I think this is something you can see in the headlines, you can see in the photos on the front page of various media outlets with the bread lines at food banks and food pantries from around the country. The situation, it has jumped. Food insecurity has doubled here in Massachusetts, according to the best data that we've got. And yet at the same time, it's really important to keep in mind that this was a problem that existed well before this current pandemic and this current economic crisis. So, even before this crisis, roughly 500,000 folks across the state were struggling with food insecurity. So I think that's critical to keep in mind that this is a problem that predated the crisis and is certainly just really been exacerbated by the economic fallout from COVID-19.
And of course, we should help our viewers understand there is some difference between food insecurity and hunger, even though they're both serious problems.
Absolutely. Food insecurity is a household level economic and social condition of limited or uncertain access to adequate food for everyone in the household so that they can lead active and healthy lives. So as you point out, it's not synonymous with there being predominantly a condition of hunger, a continuous state of hunger in the household, but it is a real problem and it's directly related to hunger.
Well, one of the other things you say in this report is that this isn't just about the pandemic. You say there are fundamental inequities that have not changed. What are you most concerned about there?
Yeah, so first, I should point out the fact that we did this report in partnership with Children's Health Watch and with Project Bread. Those are some local leading experts. They have deep expertise in food insecurity, and they produced a report before the pandemic where they did a deep dive on trends that existed, throughout the 2010s. They did a case study analysis out in East Boston, and they pointed to the fact that, even though food insecurity was roughly at 8% across the Commonwealth overall. But buried behind that single number, of course, when you pull apart the different layers, different communities had that experience in very different ways. So, for the Black community, for the Latinx community, these rates were double. Certainly for the Latinx community, what we saw and what was pointed out in this prior report by Children's Health Watch and Project Bread, that report was called The State of Hunger. And they pointed to the fact that food insecurity rates among the Latinx community in particular had just been consistently, really intensely elevated throughout most of the 2010s.
I just noticed that in one of your graphs in this report because, not surprisingly, you see the food insecurity rate going way up for Black, white, Asian respondents. For the Latinx community, which had very much the highest level, it went from 24 to 26%, which might say to me, well, maybe this didn't change very much.
Yeah, it was a really fascinating and deeply troubling thing that emerged from the data. And I think that there's a number of ways you could look at this phenomena, which was really heightened food insecurity in the Latinx community for a long time predating the pandemic. One thing that comes to mind in particular is the Trump administration's change to the public charge rule for inadmissibility. Now, I don't want to suggest that this is an issue that's relevant for every single person in the community of folks that have roots or origins or ancestry in Latin America. But we know that a sizable share are foreign born. And so these folks are dealing with all kinds of different immigration related issues. And the public charge rule, basically, that the Trump administration adjusted, they basically said that food assistance benefits from the government, SNAP benefits. That's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That previously this was not considered as a motive for denying someone a change of status or a green card or a more permanent immigration status in the United States. The Trump administration decided to pull the receipt of SNAP benefits, of food assistance, into the formula that they use to determine whether or not an immigrant that's seeking to obtain permanent residency, for example, might be denied on the grounds that they, were not self-sufficient, or they couldn't, sort of pay their way, so to speak. And so, what a lot of research has shown is that it's really the chilling or the sort of fear tactics that are embedded in that change that could and certainly have it. I think there's a good body of research demonstrating that it has led people to disenroll from SNAP benefits and from other benefits, and to be less likely to seek out that type of government assistance when times get really tough.
Well, another way to put this is I've noticed that the Trump administration has been trying to cut back benefits for adults who don't have children. But in your report, you mentioned that the brunt of the problem here is on families that do have children. Are they affected by this?
Yes, absolutely. There's a really significant difference. And again, this too predates the crisis, but it has been a gap that has widened during the pandemic. And that is that households with children, families in particular, are significantly more likely to experience food insecurity. I think it's about the rate is roughly 1/3 higher. And I think what that amounts to, when you look at the report and the data, is that about 1 in 5 households with children are currently food insecure across the Commonwealth.
What about some of the remedies? Because you mentioned, I think, the political climate. You mentioned one regulatory issue, which is pretty serious, about the public charge rule. But beyond that, what other kind of barriers are there to people getting food relief?
Sure. Well, I mean, in the world of COVID, you can imagine, going and standing out in a line at the Greater Boston Food Bank or at a variety of food pantries across the region is not such a great prospect. You're struggling to figure out how to keep your employment situation going, how to pay your bills. Not to mention it costs money to transport yourself from your home to one of these distribution sites. So there's a variety of ways in which it can be really challenging to do that. And there have been, and I'll pivoting here just a little bit to the policy response coming from the federal government. So stepping away from this public charge issue in particular, the Congress did appropriate additional funding to help folks get greater access to assistance. But I think in particular, there was $16 billion that came out of the first stimulus bill that was for extra SNAP support. There was some changes. There was folks that no longer needed to demonstrate that they were working in order to qualify for SNAP benefits. One interesting change, and I would say important change, is that all people that were receiving SNAP benefits, they were automatically bumped up to the maximum benefits level provided by their income level and the household size, the formula that the government uses, with one major exception. Households that were already receiving the maximum benefit level, that is to say, folks that were in the most difficult economic circumstances before the crisis, the way that USDA and that the federal government interpreted the change to the SNAP benefits, they designated that those families, those really economically vulnerable families, would not qualify for any additional support. And so that means millions of folks across the country are really just not seeing any boost in their food assistance from the government in one of the deepest downturns that we've seen ever in this country.
And actually, as opposed to a boost, people are getting less since, I think, the end of July. How has that been reflected in your figures?
Yeah, and in fact, you could be referring to a couple different things here. One way to think about it is that a lot of the expanded unemployment benefits that were going to people was also supplementing, the need that they had to purchase food for their households. And what we saw actually in the state data from the Department of Transitional Assistance, and this is the folks that administer the SNAP program here in Massachusetts, was that Back in late March, we were just headed into the crisis. You saw roughly a tripling in the number of SNAP applications week after week after week in the early months of the crisis. That then sort of dialed down a little bit. And I think that that really correlates pretty tightly with the expanded unemployment benefits. But as you know, those expanded benefits ran out. And so when that occurred at the end of July, we saw a secondary spike. And at that point, it was a doubling in the number of SNAP applications here in Massachusetts, which just, it really just speaks to how tenuous of a position these households are. They're just sort of teetering there. And it's like, oh, if we get the expanded unemployment, that'll keep us afloat for a little longer. If we don't, we got to go make sure we're getting our SNAP benefits. People just, and you even see this on the street level, beyond the food pantries, beyond the food banks. Here where I'm living in Jamaica Plain, we have a community refrigerator that's out. You walk past the local corner store and you see a flyer about, this is a place that you can pick up meals for your children that would otherwise be in school. This is a story that you can really feel when you're just walking around the city.
Well, I'm going to ask you maybe to speculate a little bit, because a year ago, we had families with at least one working adult that struggled with the cost of housing. Now we have families where that adult might be out of a job and the eviction moratorium has just ended. So what does that mean?
Yeah, that is another major part of the equation here. If you could think about SNAP, the direct food assistance in one lane, then you've got the unemployment assistance in another lane, and then you've got, as you allude to here, for most families, the largest really intense expense that they face month after month is, whether it's a mortgage or a rent. There are so many renters in particular that are burdened with the cost of housing, certainly in the greater Boston area, but even throughout the state. And so with the idea that that kind of relief is not going to be there, that there's not going to be a policy in place to protect renters, that just introduces a whole other level of insecurity and instability to the economic well-being that families are facing right now.
Finally, Trevor, I know there are people who might want to know more about this, and you have additional reports online coming out of the Indicators Project. So if people want to find that, what's the best way for them to do so?
Sure, great question. So please visit our website. It's www.bostonindicators.org. And I would just point to one particular aspect of the page. We've developed actually a new platform during the crisis to keep tabs on what's happening in a really sort of current way. And it's called the COVID Community Data Lab. And so this report was one research brief that we released on that platform. There's a lot more coming out. There's a lot of housing policy related research, as we were just discussing about rental protections. So please tune in. There's a lot of good stuff coming out there.
And we hope we can talk to you about some of that in the future as well. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you so much.
Yep, Trevor Mattos from the Boston Indicators Project.